What if the reason we feel lost in the modern world isn't metaphorical at all? What if, somewhere in the deep architecture of your cells, there still flickers the ghost of a sense you no longer possess? A compass you were born to carry, now silent, now sleeping. You stand at a crossroads, phone in hand, staring at the glowing map that tells you which way to turn. But there was a time, perhaps, when your ancestors needed no such device. When they simply knew. When north wasn't a direction learned or remembered, but felt. A whisper in the blood, a pull in the bones, as natural as hunger or thirst. This is a story about what we've lost. And more unsettling still, it's a story about what remains. Buried in our genes, encoded in our myths, etched into the strange tools our ancestors carried across landscapes we can barely imagine now. If this kind of history calls to you, the kind that sleeps between science and silence, between gene and memory, then stay with me. And if you're so inclined, leave a small mark of your presence. Tell me where you're listening from tonight. I'm curious who walks this path alongside us. The evidence begins not in myth, but in the microscopic. In the spiraling ladders of DNA that coil within every cell of your body, there are sequences ancient, functional, present, that code for proteins sensitive to magnetic fields. You carry them. Carry them. Every human being alive today possesses genetic instructions for magnetoreception. Magnetoreception. The word sounds clinical, almost cold. But what it describes is extraordinary. The ability to sense the Earth's magnetic field, to orient oneself not by sun or star, but by the invisible rivers of magnetism that flow through the planet itself. Birds do this. Sea turtles navigate oceans by it. Salmon return to the rivers of their birth guided by magnetic gradients we cannot perceive. Even bacteria, simple and ancient, tumble through pond water aligned to magnetic north. And we have the genes for it. The protein is called cryptochrome. In birds, it sits in the retina, photosensitive, reactive to blue light and magnetic fields simultaneously. In humans, cryptochrome exists too, in our eyes, in our tissues. The gene is there, functional, present, silent. Why? If evolution is efficient, if every gene serves a purpose or fades into obsolescence, then why do we still carry the blueprint for a sense we seemingly do not use? The orthodox answer is simple. Vestigial remnant, evolutionary echo. The genes remain because they were never costly enough to lose, never harmful enough to select against. They linger like appendixes, like wisdom teeth, relics of a body that once was. But what if that explanation is too simple? What if the gene is not a fossil but a memory? Imagine for a moment that 10,000 years ago, or 20,000 or more, humans did not navigate the world as we do now. Imagine they moved across the face of the earth with an inner certainty, guided not by landmarks or celestial maps, but by something deeper, something felt. A pull, a knowing, an orientation that required no thought, no training, no tool. How would such a people have built their world? We know that ancient humans migrated vast distances with astonishing accuracy. They crossed continents, island-hopped across oceans, followed game through tundra and forest and desert. They did this long before written maps, long before compasses, often before permanent settlements. Traditional explanations invoke keen observation, reading stars, following rivers, tracking animal paths. And surely they did all of this. But perhaps they also did something else. Something we've forgotten how to name. The archaeological record whispers of it. In strange ways. In objects that make no sense until you shift your perspective. Consider the lodestones. Lodestones are naturally magnetized pieces of magnetite, a mineral found in scattered deposits across the world. They were collected by ancient peoples, Olmec, Chinese, Greek, Aboriginal Australian. The oldest known lodestone artifact dates to 1400 BCE, a spoon-shaped object from China used for divination and geomancy. But magnetite tools and ornaments appear much earlier, scattered across Neolithic and even Paleolithic sites. Why would pre-technological humans collect magnetic stones? The standard interpretation: curiosity, ritual, decoration. Magnetite is striking, heavy, metallic, sometimes iridescent. It makes sense as an ornament or talisman. But some of these objects are not decorative. They are functional. polished, worn, shaped. Some are shaped like wands, like rods, like instruments held close to the body, pointed forward. What if they were not ornaments at all, but enhancers? What if a people who could still faintly sense magnetic fields sought to amplify that sense, to sharpen it the way we might use a lens to sharpen sight? If you carried within your body the ability to feel north as a subtle tug, a faint pressure, wouldn't you seek to strengthen it? Wouldn't you search for the stones that hum with that same invisible force? Hold them close, orient yourself by their pull? The thought is strange, almost heretical, but it fits. It fits the distribution of these objects, not random but clustered along migration routes, trade paths, pilgrimage trails. It fits the care with which they were shaped, the fact that many were carried for lifetimes, passed down, worn smooth by hands that returned to them again and again. And it fits something else, something preserved not in stone, but in story. If you're still here, listening, wandering with me through this mystery, then perhaps you're meant to be. There's no rush. Let the question settle. Let it breathe. The myths speak of it in riddles. Across cultures separated by oceans and millennia, there are stories, fragmented, strange, of people who could feel direction, who knew, without seeing, which way led home, who never lost their way. The Norse spoke of Vegvisir, the wayfinder, a symbol said to guide travelers through storm and fog. But before the symbol, there were the Valva, the wandering seers, who moved unerringly through blizzards and darkness. They were said to possess Fjolkunnig, much knowing, knowledge that came not from learning, but from within. The Aboriginal Australians speak of songlines, pathways across the continent encoded in song and story, but also felt, known in the body. Elders describe a sensation of rightness, of alignment, when walking certain routes. They do not only remember the path, they feel it. The Polynesians navigated thousands of miles of open ocean without instruments, guided by waves, stars, and birds. But they also describe something else, kahana pono, a knowing in the belly, a pull toward land even when no land is visible. They say the body knows the way. In Irish folklore, there are the Fir Gorda, the wandering men, gaunt and wild, who moved through the land on paths invisible to others, never lost, never uncertain. They were said to be aligned with the old ways, the ways of the earth itself. And in the old Germanic tongues, there is a word, Nordtank, nor thought, a thought that is always oriented, always aligned, always pointing true. These are not stories about tools or skills. They are stories about senses, about an inner knowing that does not require explanation because it simply is. What if they were not myths at all, but memories? The genetic evidence suggests that magnetoreception in humans is not entirely dormant. Small studies, controversial, debated, replicated, and contested, have shown that human brainwave patterns can shift in response to changes in magnetic fields. In controlled experiments, when participants are placed in chambers where the magnetic field is artificially rotated, their EEG readings change. They do not consciously perceive the shift. They cannot articulate it, but their brains respond. The body knows something the mind has forgotten. Other experiments have tested navigation. Participants are blindfolded, spun to disorient them, and asked to point toward a specific direction. Random chance would yield accuracy around 25%. But consistently across multiple studies, participants score slightly above chance. Not dramatically, not reliably enough for practical use, but enough to suggest something vestigial, something faint, still flickering. And then there are the anomalies, the individuals who score far above average. The ones who, even blindfolded and disoriented, point true more often than not. They exist, rare, unexplained. Their brains show heightened activity in regions associated with spatial processing, yes, but also in the pineal gland, that small, ancient structure deep in the brain, sometimes called the third eye. The pineal gland contains magnetite crystals. Not in every human, not in large quantities, but in some. Tiny, microscopic grains of magnetite, embedded in tissue, responsive to magnetic fields. Why would evolution place magnetic crystals in the brain? Again, the orthodox answer: byproduct. Trace minerals. Meaningless. But the pattern repeats. The gene is there. The protein is there. The crystals are there. The myths are there. The tools are there. What if it all points to the same truth? That once, not so impossibly long ago, humans navigated the world by a sense we have since lost or buried or silenced beneath the noise of civilization. Think about the environments where this sense would matter most. Wide, featureless landscapes, tundra, desert, open ocean. Places where landmarks are scarce, where the sun might hide for days, where survival depends on unerring movement toward resources, toward home, toward safety. These are precisely the environments early humans migrated through during the Great Dispersals, out of Africa, across Eurasia, into the Americas. These are the places where magnetoreception would not be a curiosity, but a necessity. And these are the places where the tools appear. In the Sahara, stone blades of magnetite, shaped and polished, found in sites dating back 12,000 years. In Siberia, magnetite pendants worn at the chest, found in graves from the last ice age. In Australia, hand-sized stones of magnetite, smooth and warm, carried in pouches for tens of thousands of years. In the Arctic, Inuit carvings of Tupilak, spirit figures, made from magnetite, said to guide hunters through the endless white. These objects are not utilitarian in the conventional sense. They do not cut or scrape or pierce. They are carried, held, revered. What if they were interfaces, extensions of a sense we no longer fully possess? Consider how we use tools to extend our senses now. Glasses to sharpen sight, hearing aids to amplify sound, thermometers to measure heat we cannot precisely feel. What if lodestones were the same? A way to amplify a magnetic sense that was fading, weakening, slipping away. And if so, why did it fade? The answer, perhaps, lies not in biology, but in behavior. If there's a question forming in your mind, let it linger. Don't chase it yet. We'll find it together as we go deeper. The moment we stopped moving, we stopped needing to feel the earth. Consider the timeline. For most of human existence, hundreds of thousands of years, we were nomadic. We followed herds, tracked seasons, moved with water and weather. Our survival depended on movement, on knowing where to go next, on orientation across vast and shifting landscapes. In such a life, a magnetic sense would be invaluable, essential. But roughly 12,000 years ago, something changed. We began to settle. We planted seeds. We built walls. We stayed. The agricultural revolution was not a single event, but a slow transformation that unfolded across millennia in different places. The Fertile Crescent, the Yellow River Valley, Mesoamerica, the Andes. Wherever it happened, the pattern was the same. Humans who once roamed began to root. And with that rooting, the need for an inner compass diminished. When you live in the same place for generations, you do not need to feel north. You know your surroundings. Every hill, every river, every tree is familiar. Navigation becomes local, learned, cultural, not instinctual, not magnetic. And so, perhaps the sense began to fade. Not through sudden loss, but through disuse. Through the slow atrophy that claims any faculty no longer necessary for survival. This is the mechanism evolutionary biologists call relaxed selection. When a trait stops being advantageous, mutations that would have been harmful become neutral. The trait drifts. It weakens. Over dozens, hundreds of generations, it becomes vestigial, present but not functional, encoded but not expressed. But 12,000 years is not a long time in evolutionary terms. It is roughly 600 human generations. Enough for some change, yes, but not enough for a complex sensory system to vanish entirely. Which is why the genes remain. Why the proteins remain. Why the crystals remain. We are only just post-magnetic. The compass is still there. It simply no longer speaks. But there is another layer to this. A darker, stranger possibility. What if the sense didn't only fade from disuse? What if we learned to suppress it? Think about what a magnetic sense would mean for a settled, complex society. It would mean individuals could orient themselves independently, instinctively, without guidance or authority. It would mean people could always find their way, could always leave, could always sense the pull of elsewhere. For nomadic bands, this is strength. For hierarchies, for cities, for empires, it is inconvenient. There is evidence, scattered and speculative, that early civilizations recognized this. In ancient Chinese texts on feng shui, geomancy, the art of placement, there are passages that describe techniques to quiet the inner needle, to still the pull of earth energy so that one may settle peacefully in a place not naturally aligned. The language is poetic, esoteric, but the intent is clear: to override the body's orientation, to make stillness comfortable where movement once was natural. In European grimoires, there are spells to bind the wandering foot, rituals to sever the connection between a person and the cardinal directions, to prevent them from finding their way back to something or someone they have left. Are these metaphors, symbolic expressions of psychological states? Perhaps. But perhaps they are also echoes of practices meant to suppress an actual physical sense. Rituals designed to quiet the magnetic whisper that might otherwise pull people away from settlement, from duty, from control. And if such practices existed, they would not need to be violent or dramatic. They would only need to be consistent, repeated across generations, embedded in culture, in architecture, in the alignment or deliberate misalignment of spaces where people lived. There is a reason labyrinths appear in nearly every ancient tradition. Winding paths that disorient, that remove the sense of direction, that force the walker to surrender their inner compass and follow only the path laid before them. They are called places of meditation, of pilgrimage, of spiritual trial. But they are also training grounds for directionlessness. When you emerge from a labyrinth, you do not know which way you've come. You cannot retrace your steps by instinct. You must trust the path. You must trust the guide. And perhaps, over time, that trust replaced the sense itself. This is speculative, yes, but it fits the pattern. It fits the timing. It fits the fact that the loss of magnetoreception seems to have accelerated precisely during the rise of the first large-scale civilizations: Sumer, Egypt, the Indus Valley, Shang China. Places where human life became increasingly controlled, structured, oriented not by inner knowing but by external decree. In those places, the magnetic tools vanish from the archaeological record. The lodestones, the rods, the shaped stones, they are gone. Replaced by maps, by written directions, by monuments aligned to astronomical rather than magnetic north. The sense was not needed anymore, or it was not wanted. But absence is not erasure. And the body remembers. You're still here. That means something. Perhaps you feel it too. That pull toward questions no one else seems to ask. Stay a while longer. We're not finished yet. There are people alive today who claim they can still feel it. Not many, not reliably, but scattered across the world. There are individuals, often indigenous, often living close to the land, who describe a sensation they cannot quite name. A pull, a subtle alignment, a knowing in the body of which way is which. Anthropologists have documented this among the Tzeltal Maya of Mexico, whose language contains no words for left or right, only cardinal directions. A Tzeltal speaker will say, "The cup is to the north of the plate," even indoors, even in unfamiliar places. When tested, they orient themselves with remarkable accuracy, even when blindfolded, even when moved to new locations. They do not learn this. They know it. Among the Gugu Yimithir of Australia, the same phenomenon exists. Their language, too, is cardinally oriented. They do not say move forward. They say move north or move southeast. And they are never wrong. Even children, even in darkness, orient themselves correctly. When asked how they know, they shrug. They simply do. Neuroscientists studying these populations have found differences in brain structure. Enhanced development in regions associated with spatial memory and environmental mapping, yes, but also activity in regions with no clear spatial function. Regions near the pineal gland. Regions where magnetite crystals have been found. Is it genetic? Cultural? Both? The answer remains unclear. But the ability is real, measurable, present, and it raises an uncomfortable question. If some humans still possess this sense, why don't most of us? One theory points to electromagnetic pollution. The modern world is saturated with artificial magnetic fields, power lines, electronics, cell towers, Wi-Fi. These fields are weak, far weaker than the Earth's magnetic field, but they are constant, overlapping, chaotic. They create noise, static, a jamming signal that drowns out the subtle pull of the planet's own magnetism. If human magnetoreception is faint to begin with, barely functional, then even low-level electromagnetic noise might be enough to render it useless. We would still possess the sense, still carry the genes and the proteins and the crystals, but we would never hear the signal through the noise. This is testable. Some researchers have conducted experiments in electromagnetically shielded rooms, Faraday cages, where artificial fields are blocked. In these environments, far from the hum of civilization, some participants report heightened spatial awareness, a vague but persistent sense of orientation. Their accuracy in pointing toward cardinal directions improves. Not dramatically, but measurably. The effect is strongest in participants from rural backgrounds, weakest in those who have spent their entire lives in cities. As if proximity to electromagnetic noise has a cumulative, dulling effect. As if the sense, already faint, is smothered further by the environment we've built. If this is true, then we are living in a world that has severed us from one of our oldest connections to the Earth. Not through evolution, not through biology, but through technology. Through the invisible fields we generate every moment, fields that wrap around us like a second atmosphere, drowning out the whisper of the magnetic poles. And we do not even notice, because we have maps, because we have GPS, because we have never known what it is like to feel direction rather than calculate it. But our ancestors knew, and the myths remember. In the old stories, there is a recurring motif. The hero who loses their way, who wanders lost and despairing, until they perform some ritual, some act of remembrance, and suddenly they know which way to go. They do not see a sign. They do not reason it out. They feel it. The path becomes clear. We read these stories as metaphors for self-discovery, for intuition, for trusting one's gut. And perhaps they are. But what if they are also literal? What if the hero's finding of the way was not psychological but sensory, a rekindling, however brief, of the magnetic sense? What if the rituals described, fasting, isolation, wandering in wilderness, were not symbolic, but practical? Ways to quiet the noise, to step outside the electromagnetic haze of settlement, to return to a state where the body could once again hear the earth? There is a practice among some modern wilderness guides called fox walking, a slow, deliberate way of moving through the forest, weight on the balls of the feet, awareness heightened, mind quiet. Those who practice it report strange experiences, a sense of where animals are without seeing them, an intuition for which direction leads to water, an uncanny accuracy in navigating without maps or compasses. They describe it as primal, instinctual, as if something ancient wakes up. What if what wakes up is the magnetic sense? The evidence is circumstantial. The studies are few. The scientists are cautious, and rightly so. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and the evidence here is still fragmentary, still debated. But it is there, in the genes, in the myths, in the tools, in the rare individuals who still, inexplicably, know which way is north. And it points to a profound loss. We have become a species that is lost by default. We wander through life with no inner sense of direction, no orientation, no pull toward anything beyond what we consciously decide to pursue. We are adrift, and we do not even realize it because we have always been adrift, because the sense was gone before we were born. But it was not always this way. If you're beginning to wonder what else we've lost, what other senses sleep inside us, waiting, then you're asking the right questions. And we're only going deeper. There is a moment, late at night, when the world is quiet and the hum of the day has faded, when you might feel it, just for an instant, a pull, a sense that you should be facing another way, that you are slightly misaligned. You dismiss it. Of course you do. It is faint, formless, easy to ignore. But what if it is not random? What if it is your body briefly remembering? The loss of magnetoreception is not unique to humans. It has happened before in other species under specific conditions. Researchers studying migratory birds have found that exposure to artificial light and electromagnetic fields can disrupt their ability to navigate. Birds raised in cities, surrounded by radio waves and LED lights, often lose their way during migration. They carry the genes, the proteins, the neural structures, but the sense does not function properly. It is not genetic damage. It is environmental interference. And when those birds are moved to rural areas, to places far from electromagnetic noise, their navigation ability often improves. The sense returns, at least partially. The compass recalibrates. If this can happen to birds within a single generation, what might have happened to humans over thousands of years of increasingly urbanized, electromagnetically saturated living? The implications are staggering. Because if magnetoreception can be suppressed by environment, then it might also be restored. Not easily, not quickly, but perhaps. There are people experimenting with this now. Biohackers, mostly on the fringes of science. They implant small magnets into their fingertips, subcutaneous, and report a new sense. An awareness of magnetic fields as a tactile sensation, a subtle pressure or vibration when near electronics, near metal, near magnetic north. It is crude, far from the elegance of natural magnetoreception. But it is something, a proof of concept. If an implanted magnet can create a new magnetic sense, however limited, then perhaps the dormant biological machinery could be reawakened. Perhaps the genes could be upregulated, the proteins re-expressed, the neural pathways rekindled. Perhaps, with the right conditions, the compass could wake. But should it? This is not a simple question. Because the loss of magnetoreception may have been necessary, not in a biological sense but in a cultural one. Civilization, as we know it, depends on people staying put. On cities, on farms, on infrastructure that cannot move. If humans still possessed a strong magnetic sense, a pull toward elsewhere, toward movement, toward the horizon, would we ever have built the world we now inhabit? Perhaps the sense had to fade for civilization to rise. Perhaps the two are incompatible. Or perhaps that is simply the story we tell ourselves to justify what we've lost. Because there is another possibility, another way to interpret the evidence. What if the loss of magnetoreception was not passive, not an inevitable byproduct of settlement and technology, but a choice, a trade, a sacrifice made, consciously or unconsciously, by our ancestors? Think about shamanism, about initiation rites, about the concept of dying to the old self that appears in nearly every spiritual tradition. These rites often involve disorientation, spinning, fasting, sensory deprivation, consuming substances that alter perception. The initiate loses their sense of direction, their sense of self, their sense of place. And when they emerge, they are different, changed, reborn. What if part of that change was neurological? What if the rite was not only psychological but sensory, a deliberate severance from the magnetic sense, a way of cutting the tie to the nomadic animal body to make way for the settled, thinking, cultural self? If so, then the loss of magnetoreception was not an accident of history. It was a threshold, a doorway through which we passed, knowingly or not, to become something other than what we were. And we cannot go back through it without becoming something other than what we are. This is why the question of restoration is not simple. Because to restore the sense would not be to add a new ability, but to reawaken an old one. And with it, perhaps, old drives, old instincts, old pulls that our conscious minds no longer recognize or understand. Would we still want to stay? Would we still find meaning in the structures we've built, the lives we've chosen, the places we call home? Or would we feel the pull of elsewhere, constant and undeniable, like a tide that never stops? The myths suggest this was a real fear. In many traditions, there are warnings against seeking the old ways, the old senses, the old paths. Not because they are evil, but because they are dangerous. Because they lead away. Because to follow them is to leave behind everything the settled world offers. Safety, community, continuity. The Irish tales of the otherworld describe it as a place of eternal beauty and youth, but also a place from which one cannot return. To go there is to be lost to the human world forever. And the way to the other world is always by following a pull, a sense, a knowing in the body that leads away from the known paths. Is this literal? A memory of people who, following their magnetic sense, wandered away from settlements and never came back? Or is it metaphor? A warning against the lure of instinct in a world that demands choice? Perhaps it is both. What is certain is that we are a species that has chosen, or been forced, to live without one of the senses our bodies were designed to carry. We navigate by tools, by thought, by learned skills, never by instinct, never by the pull of the earth itself. And something in us knows this. Something in us grieves it. Why else would we be so drawn to the idea of finding our way? Why else would we speak of inner compasses, of true north, of feeling lost or finding direction? Always in metaphor, always in symbol, as if reaching for a language we once spoke but can no longer quite remember. There's something ancient stirring here. Can you feel it? If you've made it this far, maybe you were always meant to find this. Let's see where it leads. The body remembers what the mind forgets. This is a truth that echoes through biology, through neuroscience, through the strange persistence of instincts that no longer serve us in the modern world. We flinch from snakes we've never seen. We crave sugar and fat we no longer need. We feel uneasy in open spaces where predators no longer hunt. And perhaps we feel lost, chronically, existentially lost, because we no longer possess the sense that once told us where we were. Depression, anxiety, dissociation. These are often described as states of disorientation. Therapists speak of patients who feel unmoored, adrift, disconnected. The language of psychological distress is the language of navigation, of being without direction, of not knowing where you are or where you're going. What if this is not just metaphor? What if the loss of magnetoreception has left us with a neurological void, a gap where a sense once was, and the absence of that sense manifests as a chronic, low-level disorientation that we experience as psychological rather than sensory? This is speculative, yes. But consider the brain regions associated with magnetoreception, when they exist, when they're active, are also associated with spatial memory, environmental mapping, and a sense of being grounded in physical space. When those regions are inactive, when the signals they once processed are absent, the brain has to compensate. It has to build a sense of orientation from other sources: vision, memory, learned spatial relationships. But these are conscious, effortful processes. They require attention. They tire us. And they can fail. People who suffer from spatial disorientation, whether from neurological damage or conditions like vertigo, often describe it not just as confusion, but as profound existential distress. The loss of knowing where you are physically in space translates almost immediately into a loss of knowing where you are, metaphorically, in life. What if we are all, to some degree, experiencing a milder version of this? A low-grade spatial disorientation so constant and so familiar that we've mistaken it for the normal human condition. And what if the tools we use to cope, maps, GPS, smartphones, are not solving the problem but deepening it? Because these tools do not restore the sense. They replace it. They provide direction externally, mechanically, but they do not teach the body to feel direction. If anything, they atrophy whatever vestigial capacity remains. The more we rely on external guidance, the less we listen to internal cues. The compass grows quieter. The crystals settle. The genes remain, but the sense fades further into dormancy. We are becoming more lost, not less. More dependent, not more capable. And we do not even recognize it as loss, because we have forgotten what it is like to find our way by feeling. But the Earth has not forgotten. The magnetic field is still there, ancient and immense, flowing from pole to pole, a river of invisible force that has shaped life on this planet for billions of years. Every organism that has ever lived has evolved within it, under it, surrounded by it. And many have learned to sense it, to use it, to orient themselves by it. We are the exception. We are the species that turned away. But the field remains. And it is changing. The Earth's magnetic poles are not fixed. They wander. Slowly, usually a few kilometers per year. But in recent decades, the North Magnetic Pole has accelerated. It is moving faster than it has in recorded history, drifting from the Canadian Arctic toward Siberia at a rate of 50 kilometers per year. The South Magnetic Pole is shifting too. The field itself is weakening, thinning, in some places fragmenting. Scientists debate whether this is the beginning of a geomagnetic reversal, a pole flip, an event that has occurred hundreds of times in Earth's history, but not in the span of human civilization. The evidence suggests it could happen within a few thousand years, perhaps sooner, perhaps within the lifetime of someone alive today. No one knows what such an event would mean for life on Earth. The magnetic field protects us from solar radiation, cosmic rays, charged particles that would otherwise strip away the atmosphere, sterilize the surface. If the field weakens significantly during a reversal, the consequences could be catastrophic. Or they could be mild. The geological record is ambiguous. But one thing is certain. Any organism that relies on magnetoreception to navigate would be affected. Birds would lose their way. Sea turtles would strand. Salmon would fail to return. The invisible map by which they orient themselves would become distorted, unreliable, chaotic. And if humans still possessed magnetoreception, we would be affected too. But we don't. So we won't be. We'll navigate by satellites, by technology, by external systems that do not depend on the Earth's magnetic field. Unless those systems fail. Unless, in the midst of a geomagnetic reversal, solar storms intensify, satellites fall silent, GPS networks collapse. Unless the technological infrastructure we've built to replace our lost sense proves fragile, dependent on the very magnetic stability we've insulated ourselves from. What then? Would we remember how to feel the Earth? Would the dormant sense awaken, forced by necessity, by survival? Or would we simply be lost, truly, utterly lost, in a way no species has ever been before? This is not alarmism. This is not prophecy. This is simply a recognition of fragility, of dependence, of the strange irony that we have replaced a biological sense with technological systems that are themselves vulnerable to the same forces that sense once protected us from. We are navigating blindly, trusting instruments we do not fully understand, in a cosmos that is indifferent to our trust. And somewhere, deep in our cells, the genes for magnetoreception remain. Silent, waiting, for what we do not know. But perhaps it is time we asked. If you're still listening, still following this thread into the unknown, thank you. Let it rest in your mind. Let it find you in your dreams tonight. There is a word in the Old Norse language, atavatund. It means knowledge of the 8 directions, but it implies something deeper, a sense of orientation so complete, so integrated into being, that it requires no thought, no effort, no map. It is simply known. The word is archaic now, rarely used. When it appears in sagas and eddas, translators struggle with it, rendering it variously as sense of direction, awareness, mindfulness. But none of these quite capture the original meaning, because atavatund is not about attention. It is about inherence, about a quality of consciousness that is always already oriented, always already aligned. It is the word for what we have lost. And it is not the only one. In Gaelic, there is confios, co-knowledge, a knowing shared between self and land, a sense that the body is not separate from the place it inhabits but continuous with it, informed by it. In Sanskrit, dikbuddhi, directional intelligence, an awareness of the cardinal points as fundamental aspects of reality, not abstractions but presences, forces, qualities of space itself. These words exist because the experiences they describe once existed. They were not poetic flourishes. They were names for real, lived capacities. And they are gone from us now almost entirely. We do not teach them. We do not practice them. Most people today do not even know they existed. But the myths preserve them. And the myths tell us something else. They tell us that the loss was noticed, that it was mourned, that there were people who remembered a time when humans could feel the world differently, and they warned that something precious had been given up, something that should not have been so easily surrendered. In the Finnish Kalevala, there is a passage about the hero Vainamoinen, who loses his way in a dark forest. He sings a song, an old song, a song from the time before time, and as he sings, he begins to feel the directions again. The north pulls at his chest. The east hums in his ears. The south warms his left hand. The west cools his right. He does not see the way. He feels it. And the forest, which was chaos, becomes ordered again. The passage is brief, easy to overlook, but it is there, a memory encoded in epic of a sense that could be rekindled by remembering, by song, by reconnection to something older than the settled world. In the Aboriginal Dreamtime stories, there is a recurring motif. The ancestor beings who walked the songlines did not only sing the land into existence, they sang themselves into alignment with it. The song was not external. It was not a map or a mnemonic. It was the sense. The act of singing the directions made the directions felt. This is not mysticism. Or rather, it is not only mysticism. It is a description of a somatic sensory practice. A way of attuning the body to magnetic fields through rhythm, through vibration, through the resonance between sound and neural structures. Modern research into binaural beats and brainwave entrainment has shown that certain frequencies can alter consciousness, enhance spatial awareness, deepen focus. What if the songs of the ancestors were not random, but precisely calibrated to activate dormant neural pathways? To wake the magnetic sense? What if the way to restore it is not through genetics or implants or shielding from electromagnetic noise, but through culture, through practice, through the deliberate cultivation of something we dismissed as primitive, as superstitious, as irrelevant to the modern world? What if we could sing ourselves back into alignment? The idea feels absurd. And yet, there are practices still extant, still taught in small pockets of the world, that seem to aim at precisely this. Techniques of meditation, of breathwork, of movement that claim to enhance energetic sensitivity, to awaken dormant senses, to reconnect the body with the earth. These practices are often dismissed by mainstream science as placebo, as wishful thinking, as New Age nonsense. But dismissal is not disproof. And there are anomalies. People who practice these techniques sometimes report strange abilities, heightened intuition about direction, a sense of presence in the landscape, and uncanny accuracy in navigating without tools. When tested, some of them perform above chance. Not dramatically, not consistently, but measurably. Are they accessing magnetoreception or something else? No one knows. The studies are small, the effects subtle, the mechanisms entirely unclear. But the effects are there. And if they are there, then perhaps the sense is not as lost as we think. Perhaps it is only sleeping. Perhaps it can be woken. But to wake it would require more than individual effort. It would require cultural shift. It would require valuing embodied knowledge over abstract information, direct perception over mediated experience, the felt sense of place over the calculated coordinates of location. It would require, in other words, a reversal of much of what we call progress. This is the uncomfortable truth at the heart of the question. Because to restore magnetoreception is not to add a new technology, a new app, a new enhancement to the human toolkit. It is to return to something older, something slower, something that cannot be monetized or optimized or scaled. It is to remember that we are animals, that we evolved in relationship with the earth, not in dominion over it, that our bodies know things our minds have forgotten. And perhaps we are not ready for that. Perhaps we do not want it. Perhaps the world we have built is too dependent on our lostness, our disorientation, our constant need for external guidance and control. Or perhaps some of us are ready. Perhaps there are people, scattered, quiet, unnoticed, who are already relearning how to feel the earth, who are teaching their bodies to listen again, who are walking the old paths, singing the old songs, not as performance or nostalgia, but as practice, as reclamation, as resistance. You're one of the few who have stayed this long. Maybe that means something. Maybe you were meant to hear this, to carry it forward in whatever way calls to you. There is a species of sea turtle, caretta, the loggerhead, that hatches on the beaches of Florida and immediately swims out into the Atlantic. It is weeks old, weighing less than a handful, and it navigates across thousands of miles of open ocean to reach the Sargasso Sea, where it will spend the next decade feeding and growing. No adult guides it. No instinct tells it to follow the sun or the stars. It swims, unerringly, along a magnetic corridor, a pathway defined by gradients in the Earth's magnetic field, invisible to human eyes but clear as a highway to the turtle. It does not learn this. It knows it. From birth. From the first moment it touches salt water. Scientists have tested this by raising hatchlings in tanks surrounded by magnetic coils, altering the field to mimic different locations along the migration route. The turtles respond immediately, changing direction to match the magnetic signature. as if they believe they have been transported across the ocean. The sense is that precise, that fundamental, and when the turtles mature, decades later, they return. Not to just any beach but to the exact stretch of sand where they were born. Again, they navigate by magnetism, by the unique magnetic signature of that place, encoded in their neural structures from the moment they drag themselves from egg to sea. This is not intelligence in the way we usually define it. It is not memory in the conscious sense. It is something older, something embedded so deeply in biology that it operates below the level of thought, below the level of self. And it works, perfectly, effortlessly, year after year, generation after generation, for millions of years. We had that once, or something like it, perhaps not as precise, perhaps not as specialized, but functional, present, real, and we gave it up. The question is, why? There are many answers. We've explored some of them. Settlement, electromagnetic noise, cultural suppression. But there is another answer, one that is less about external forces and more about internal choice. We gave it up because we wanted to be free. Freedom, in the human sense, is not about doing whatever instinct demands. It is about doing what instinct does not demand. It is about choice, about agency, about the ability to go against the pull, the drive, the compulsion. A sea turtle is not free. It is magnificent. It is perfectly adapted. It is an embodiment of evolutionary elegance, but it is not free. It goes where the magnetic field tells it to go. It has no choice. It cannot decide to swim elsewhere, to explore, to wonder what lies beyond the corridor it was born to follow. Humans can. Humans do. And perhaps the cost of that freedom was the sense that once constrained us. Because if you can feel north always undeniably, as a pull in your bones, then you are never entirely free to go south or east, or to wander aimlessly, or to stay still. The sense orients you. And orientation is a kind of constraint. To lose the sense was to lose the constraint. To become truly directionally free. To navigate by choice rather than by instinct. To decide moment by moment where to go, not because the earth pulls you there, but because you choose to go there. This is the trade. Freedom for orientation. Agency for belonging. The ability to go anywhere, at the cost of never quite knowing where you are. And it is a trade we have made collectively as a species. Perhaps unconsciously, perhaps inevitably, but made nonetheless. And now, 10,000 years later, we live with the consequences. We are free. More free than any other species. We live in places our biology was never designed for. Deserts, tundra, skyscrapers, space stations. We move across the planet at will, untethered by migration routes or magnetic corridors or the seasonal pull of resources. We are gloriously, terrifyingly unbound. And we are lost. Not just navigationally, existentially. We do not know where we belong. We do not know where we are going. We do not know in any deep, felt, instinctual way what our purpose is, what our place is, what the pull of our being is oriented toward. We are free to choose. But we do not know what to choose, because we have no inner compass to guide us. This is the paradox at the heart of modern human existence. We have gained the freedom to go anywhere, and in doing so we have lost the sense of where we should go. We are no longer constrained by instinct, but we are no longer guided by it either. And so we wander. Not physically, most of us, but psychologically, spiritually. We search for meaning, for direction, for something to orient ourselves toward. We invent philosophies, religions, ideologies, self-help systems, all of them attempts to build externally the sense of direction we no longer possess internally. And none of them quite work, because they are conscious constructs, fragile and contingent, always vulnerable to doubt, to revision, to collapse. They are not rooted in the body. They are not felt as the pull of the earth is felt, undeniable and ancient and true. We are a species trying to navigate by ideas, when once we navigated by sense. And the ideas are not enough. But perhaps this, too, is part of the journey. Perhaps the loss of magnetoreception was not the end, but a transition. A passage through disorientation toward something new. Because if we could restore the sense, if we could relearn how to feel the earth, to align ourselves with forces older and larger than our individual will, we would do so not as unconscious creatures but as conscious ones. Not as turtles, bound by instinct, but as humans, choosing to listen to instinct while retaining the freedom to choose. We would be oriented but not constrained, guided but not determined. We would carry both the compass and the freedom to decide whether to follow it. This would be something new, something unprecedented in the history of life on Earth. A synthesis of instinct and agency, of biological sense and conscious choice. It would be the next step, and perhaps we are taking it now. Slowly, haltingly, in the practices of those who seek to reconnect with the land, with the body, with the old ways. In the research of scientists exploring magnetoreception, biohacking, neuroplasticity. In the quiet, personal experiments of people who walk barefoot, who meditate facing north, who sleep aligned with the poles. These are small acts, marginal, easy to dismiss, but they are also seeds. And seeds, planted in silence, can grow into forests. Maybe the story isn't over yet. Maybe you're part of how it continues, just by listening, by wondering, by letting these questions live inside you. There is an experiment you can try if you wish. It requires no equipment, no special knowledge, only willingness and stillness and time. Go somewhere quiet, somewhere away from buildings, from roads, from the hum of electricity. A forest if you can, a field, a beach, somewhere the land is old and open and largely untouched. Sit, close your eyes, breathe, and then, without thinking about it, without reasoning it out, point. Point in the direction that feels right. Not north necessarily, not any specific direction, just the direction that pulls at you, the direction your body wants to face. Don't question it. Don't second guess. Just point. Then open your eyes. Check a compass or the sun or the stars. See where you pointed. You will probably be wrong. Most people are. The sense is faint, eroded, buried under layers of learned navigation and conscious thought. But sometimes, not often, not reliably, but sometimes people point true. They point north or toward home, or toward some unseen landmark they did not consciously know was there. And they feel, for just a moment, the ghost of something ancient stirring. This is not proof. It is not science. It is only an invitation to wonder whether the sense is truly gone, or only sleeping. Whether it could be woken with patience, with practice, with a willingness to listen to the body in ways we have forgotten how to do. Because the body still speaks. In hunger, in pain, in desire, in the subtle cues of exhaustion and readiness and alignment. We have learned to override many of these signals, to ignore them in favor of schedules and obligations and conscious plans. But they are still there, still whispering. And if the body still speaks of hunger and pain, why not direction? Why not the pull of the earth itself? Perhaps it does. Perhaps we simply no longer listen. Or perhaps we are beginning to listen again. There is a movement, small but growing, of people who are exploring what they call rewilding. Not just of the land, but of the body, of the senses, of perception itself. They practice skills long thought obsolete. Tracking, foraging, fire-making without tools. But they also practice something subtler. Sensory attunement. Learning to see, hear, smell, feel the world as animals do, as humans once did, before language and technology and abstraction created distance between perception and reality. And some of them report that, over time, they begin to develop a sense of direction that is not learned, not calculated, but felt. They describe it as a subtle pull, a preference, a rightness. They do not always trust it. It is too faint, too inconsistent. But it is there. Are they reawakening magnetoreception? Or are they simply becoming better at reading environmental cues, the angle of sunlight, the pattern of moss, the flow of wind? No one knows. The line between sensory attunement and instinctual sense is blurry, especially when the sense in question is so poorly understood. But it does not matter. What matters is that they are listening. They are paying attention. They are cultivating a relationship with the land that is not abstract, not mediated by technology, but direct, embodied, felt. And in doing so, they are remembering something we thought we had lost. This is not a call to abandon the modern world. not a rejection of technology or progress or the comforts and possibilities that civilization affords. It is simply a recognition that something has been lost in the trade, something that mattered, something that still matters, even if we do not yet fully understand why. Because the body knows. The body knows that it was once oriented, once aligned, once part of a web of forces and flows that connected it to the earth in ways that were seamless, unconscious, natural. And the body grieves the loss of that connection, even if the mind does not recognize the grief. This is why we seek nature, why we hike and camp and travel to wild places, why we feel something loosen in us when we stand at the edge of the ocean or the top of a mountain. We say we are seeking beauty, seeking peace, seeking escape from the stress of daily life. But perhaps we are also seeking orientation, seeking to feel, even briefly, the pull of the earth itself, seeking to remember what it is like to belong to a place, to be aligned with forces older than thought, older than culture, older than humanity itself. We are seeking the compass. And perhaps, if we are patient, if we are willing to listen, it will begin to speak again. Not loudly, not suddenly, but in whispers, in subtle shifts, in the quiet recognition that you are facing the right way, that you are on the right path, that you are aligned, not with ideas or goals or external markers of success, but with something deeper, something truer, something that has always been there, waiting for you to notice. This is the promise hidden in the loss, that what was given up can be reclaimed. Not as it was, not as unconscious instinct, but as conscious choice, as a practice, as a return. And perhaps that return is already beginning. Perhaps it began the moment you started wondering whether the sense still exists, still whispers, still waits. Perhaps it began the moment you started listening. You've traveled far with me tonight, through time, through myth, through the silent language of genes. If something here resonated, if something shifted, maybe leave a trace of your presence. Let me know you were here. In the deep silence before dawn, when the night has thinned but the sun has not yet risen, there is a moment of stillness. The world holds its breath. The air is cool and motionless. Even the birds have not yet begun to sing. It is in this moment, some say, that the earth speaks most clearly. Not in words, not in images, but in the oldest language of all, the language of pull and pressure, of alignment and orientation, of forces that move through the body like wind through water. If you were to stand outside in that moment, eyes closed, mind quiet, you might feel it. Not as thought, not as knowledge, but as presence. A subtle sense that the world has direction, that space is not neutral but structured, that you are not floating in a void but standing on a sphere, a living planet, wrapped in fields of force that bend and flow and connect everything. You might feel that you, too, are part of that flow, that your body is not separate from the earth but continuous with it, made of the same elements, shaped by the same forces, oriented by the same unseen currents. This is not mysticism. Or rather, it is not only mysticism. It is physics. It is biology. It is the simple, profound truth that you are matter, and matter responds to forces, and the earth is the source of forces that have shaped every atom of your being. You are magnetic, not metaphorically, literally. The iron in your blood, the magnetite crystals in your tissues, the cells that still carry the genes for sensing magnetic fields. All of this is real, physical, present. You are a compass. You have always been a compass. You have only forgotten how to read yourself. But forgetting is not the same as erasing. The capacity remains. Silent, dormant, waiting. And perhaps the act of remembering begins not with effort, but with stillness, with listening, with allowing the body to speak in the only way it knows how, through sensation, through subtle cues, through the quiet knowledge that does not need words. This is why the old stories tell us to go into the wilderness, to fast, to be alone, to strip away the distractions of the settled world. Not because the wilderness holds magic, but because it holds silence. And in silence, the body can be heard. And in silence, the earth can be heard. And in that hearing, something ancient returns. Not as power, not as mastery, but as belonging, as alignment, as the simple, undeniable recognition that you are part of this world, woven into its fabric, oriented by its forces, held by its fields. You are not lost. You have never been lost. You have only stopped listening. But you can begin again. It will not be easy. The noise of the modern world is loud, constant, inescapable. The electromagnetic fields, the screens, the schedules, the endless stream of information and distraction. All of it drowns out the subtle signals, the quiet pulls, the ancient whispers. But even in the noise, there are moments of silence. Early mornings, late nights, walks in the woods. Moments when you turn off the phone, close the laptop, step away from the hum of civilization. In those moments, listen. Not with your ears, with your body, with the part of you that knows without knowing, that feels without thinking, that orients without effort. Ask yourself, which way do I want to face? Where do I want to go? What pulls at me? And then, this is the hard part, trust the answer. Even if it makes no sense. Even if it contradicts your plans, your goals, your reasoned understanding of what you should do. Trust it. Follow it. See where it leads. Not blindly, not recklessly, but with the kind of attention you would give to any subtle sense. The way you trust your balance, your hunger, your sense of when someone is watching you even though you cannot see them. Because the magnetic sense, if it exists, if it can be woken, is no different. It is a quiet sense, a background sense, a sense that whispers rather than shouts. But it is there. And if enough of us begin to listen, if enough of us begin to trust the quiet pulls, the subtle orientations, the sense of rightness that has no rational explanation, then perhaps, slowly over generations, the sense will strengthen. Perhaps the genes will upregulate. The proteins will express. The neural pathways will deepen. The crystals will align. Perhaps we will become, once again, a species that knows where it is. Not just on a map, not just in relation to landmarks and coordinates, but in relation to the Earth itself, to the poles, to the fields, to the ancient, invisible architecture of magnetism that has shaped life on this planet since the beginning. This is not prophecy. It is not promise. It is only possibility. Possibility that rests quietly in your hands, in your body, in the choices you make about where to go, how to listen, what to trust. The compass is there. It has always been there. And it is waiting for you to remember. So here you are at a threshold. Not the end of the journey, but a pause. A place where you can choose whether to continue deeper, to walk further into the mystery, or to return to the familiar world with something new stirring in your awareness. If you choose to continue, if you feel the pull, then know that the path ahead is not one I can fully map for you. Because it is your path, your body, your compass, but I can offer a few more waypoints, a few more pieces of the pattern, a few more questions to carry with you into the silence. Consider the structure of your skeleton, not metaphorically but literally. The arrangement of bones, the alignment of joints, the axis around which your body is built. You are bilaterally symmetrical. Left and right mirror each other. But you are also oriented along another axis. Anterior and posterior, front and back. And most significantly, superior and inferior, head and feet, aligned with gravity, with the pull of the earth toward its center. This vertical axis is not arbitrary. It is fundamental to your structure, your movement, your sense of self in space. When you lose it, when you fall, when you're disoriented, when vertigo strikes, you feel not just physically unstable but existentially unmoored. But there is another axis, one we rarely acknowledge. The axis of magnetic alignment. North-south. The axis defined not by gravity, but by the Earth's magnetic field. In animals that possess magnetoreception, this axis is as real as the vertical axis defined by gravity. They feel it. They orient to it. Their bodies are structured to sense it, to respond to it, to align with it. And we carry the same structures, the same proteins, the same crystals, the same potential for orientation along that invisible axis. What would it mean to feel that axis? To sense not just up and down, left and right, forward and back, but also north and south. It would mean experiencing space differently, not as a neutral container in which you move, but as a structured field, a patterned environment with intrinsic directions, intrinsic orientations. It would mean your sense of position would include not just where you are in relation to landmarks, but where you are in relation to the magnetic architecture of the planet itself. It would mean you could never truly be lost, because you would always know which way was which. You would always have a reference point, an orientation, a felt sense of alignment with something larger than yourself. This is what we've lost, or what we've buried, or what we've forgotten how to access. But consider, if the sense can be suppressed, can it also be cultivated? There is evidence, tentative, controversial, but present, that magnetoreception in humans can be enhanced through training. Not genetic modification, not technological augmentation, but simple, consistent practice. One study, conducted in 2019, involved participants spending time each day in rooms where the magnetic field was subtly manipulated. Over weeks, some participants began to show measurable changes in brain activity in response to magnetic shifts. They did not consciously perceive the changes, but their brains were responding. The sense was being exercised. Another approach involves meditation practices focused on directional awareness. Participants sit facing different directions on different days, paying attention to subtle differences in how they feel, how they think, how they breathe. Over time, some report developing preferences, intuitions, a sense that certain directions feel right or aligned, while others feel off or dissonant. Is this magnetoreception? Or is it some other form of environmental sensitivity? The research is too preliminary to say, but the fact that any such training effects exist suggests that the door is not closed, that the sense, however dormant, can respond to attention, to practice, to cultivation. And if it can, then the question becomes not whether we should try to restore it, but how. Because this is not a simple matter of following a protocol or taking a supplement. It is a matter of relearning how to inhabit your body differently, how to listen to signals you have spent your entire life ignoring, how to trust sensations that seem irrational, inexplicable, incompatible with the conscious, analytical mode of awareness that dominates modern consciousness. It requires unlearning as much as learning. Unlearning the habit of relying on external guidance. Unlearning the assumption that if you don't consciously perceive something, it doesn't exist. Unlearning the belief that your body is a passive vehicle for your mind, rather than an intelligent, sensing, knowing organism in its own right. This is difficult, perhaps impossible for some, but for others, for those who feel the pull, who sense the absence, who long for a deeper connection to the earth, it may be the work that calls them. And it is work, not a quick fix, not a weekend workshop, not a single technique. It is the work of years, of decades, of a lifetime spent reorienting yourself to forces that civilization has taught you to ignore. But the rewards, if the old stories are true, are profound. To know where you are always, to feel aligned with the earth always, to move through the world with a confidence that is not born of maps or plans or rational understanding, but of felt connection, of embodied knowing, of the deep certainty that comes from being part of something larger than yourself. This is what the word Atavaton points to. This is what the songlines preserve. This is what the myths remember. And this is what waits for us, if we choose to remember. But there is a cost. There is always a cost. To restore the sense is to change yourself. To become something you are not now. To reawaken instincts that have slept for hundreds of generations. To feel pulls and drives and orientations that your conscious mind may not understand, may not want, may not be able to integrate into the life you've built. It is to step closer to the animal, to the body, to the earth. And in doing so, you may step further from the human world. From the settled, civilized, rational order that depends on people who do not feel the pull of elsewhere, who do not hear the whisper of the wild, who do not long to wander in ways that cannot be explained or controlled. This is the threshold, the choice, the question that only you can answer. Do you want to remember? Do you want to feel the compass? Or are you content to navigate by the tools and technologies and external systems that have replaced it? There is no right answer, no moral imperative, only choice. But if you have listened this far, if you have followed this thread through all its turnings and doubts and questions, then perhaps the choice has already been made. Perhaps you were always going to walk this path. Perhaps you were always meant to remember. And if so, then know this. You are not alone. There are others. Not many. Not organized. Not visible in any public way. But they exist. People who have felt the pull and followed it. who have spent years cultivating sensitivity to forces most people do not even know exist, who have learned to navigate by feeling rather than thinking, by alignment rather than calculation. Some of them are indigenous elders, carrying knowledge that has been passed down through oral tradition, through practice, through lineages that predate writing, that predate civilization. They do not speak of it often, not to outsiders. It is not for public consumption. It is sacred, practical, essential to their way of being in the world. Others are modern seekers, people who have stumbled upon the possibility through personal experience, through moments of inexplicable knowing, through the strange recognition that they could feel something their culture insisted did not exist. They have pursued it quietly, privately, often without language for what they are doing, often unsure whether they are deluding themselves or discovering something real. And still others are scientists, researchers at the edges of mainstream academia, investigating questions that most of their colleagues dismiss as fringe, as pseudoscience, as unworthy of serious inquiry. They face skepticism, funding challenges, career risks, but they persist because the data, however tentative, suggests something is there, something worth exploring. These three groups rarely meet. They speak different languages, literal and conceptual. They have different methods, different goals, different understandings of what magnetoreception is and what it means, but they are all engaged in the same fundamental project, the reawakening of a sense that has slept too long. And what they have learned, collectively, is this: the sense is not entirely gone. It is suppressed, dormant, but recoverable. It requires certain conditions: silence from electromagnetic noise, time in natural environments, practices that cultivate embodied awareness, willingness to trust subtle sensations that seem irrational. It requires patience. The sense does not return suddenly, dramatically, like turning on a light. It emerges slowly, faintly, like the stars appearing as twilight deepens. At first, you are not sure it is there. You think you might be imagining it. But gradually, over weeks, months, years, the signal strengthens. The sense clarifies. And one day you realize you can feel it. Not all the time, not perfectly, but sometimes, in quiet moments, in wild places, when you stop thinking and start sensing. You can feel which way is north. And with that feeling comes something else. Something deeper, harder to articulate. A sense of belonging, of rightness, of being connected to the planet in a way that is not intellectual, not abstract, but visceral, immediate, undeniable. You feel held, oriented, aligned. You feel, in a way you perhaps never have before, at home. This is what the sense offers. Not a practical tool for navigation in the age of GPS. Not a party trick to impress friends, but a restoration of relationship. A return to a way of being in the world that our species knew for hundreds of thousands of years and has only recently abandoned. And that relationship changes you. It changes how you move through space. You walk differently, more attuned to the land, more aware of subtle shifts in terrain, in atmosphere, in the invisible architecture of the magnetic field. It changes how you make decisions. You learn to consult the body, to ask not just what do I think, but what do I feel, and to trust that the feeling carries information, intelligence, guidance that the thinking mind cannot access. It changes how you understand yourself. You are not just a mind, not just a consciousness piloting a meat vehicle. You are an organism, evolved over billions of years, embedded in a web of relationships with the earth, the sun, the stars, the magnetic field that wraps around the planet like an invisible embrace. You are part of it, always have been, always will be. And to remember that, to feel it, not just know it intellectually, is to experience a kind of homecoming that nothing else in modern life provides. This is why people who reawaken the sense speak of it in almost mystical terms. Not because it is mystical, but because it is profound. Because it touches something so deep, so fundamental, that it defies easy description. It is the sense of where you are. Not on a map. Not in relation to landmarks or coordinates. But in relation to the earth itself. To the field that holds you. To the forces that have shaped every form of life that has ever existed on this planet. It is the sense of home. And once you feel it, you cannot unfeel it. You cannot go back to the old way of being, The old way of moving through the world as if space were neutral, as if direction were arbitrary, as if orientation were something you calculated rather than something you felt. You are changed. Permanently. Irrevocably. And this is why the choice matters. Why it is not a trivial question, not a curiosity to be indulged lightly. Because to reawaken the sense is to change your relationship with the world, with yourself, with the forces that move through you and around you and beneath you. It is to step into a way of being that modern civilization does not recognize, does not value, does not have a place for. It is to become, in some fundamental sense, indigenous again. Not culturally, that is not something that can or should be appropriated, but sensorially, biologically, in the deep structure of how you inhabit your body and your place on this planet. And the world needs this, desperately, urgently, because the crisis we face, ecological, spiritual, existential, is at its root a crisis of disconnection. We have severed ourselves from the earth. We treat it as a resource, a backdrop, a collection of objects to be used and discarded. We have forgotten that we are part of it, that we depend on it, that we are made of it, and that forgetting is killing us, killing the planet, killing the future. To reawaken magnetoreception is not a solution to that crisis. It is too small, too subtle, too individual. But it is a thread, a way back, a practice of remembering what it means to be a body on a planet, oriented by forces older than consciousness, held by fields that care nothing for our abstractions or our economies or our ideologies. It is a practice of coming home. And perhaps, if enough of us do it, if enough of us remember, we will begin to build a culture that remembers too, that values embodied knowing, that honors the senses we carry in our bones, that recognizes the earth not as a thing to be managed, but as a presence to be felt, to be listened to be aligned with. This is the possibility, the hope, the invitation. If you feel pulled, wander here a little longer. There's no hurry. The compass doesn't demand anything. It only waits, patient as stone, old as the world itself. But let us return to the science, to the hard evidence, to the question of what exactly we are talking about when we speak of human magnetoreception. Because it is easy to drift into poetry, into speculation, into visions of what might be. But the foundation must be solid. The claims must be testable. The phenomenon, if it exists, must be grounded in biology, in measurable reality. And it is. The cryptochrome proteins are real. They exist in human retinal cells. They are known to be photosensitive, involved in regulating circadian rhythms. And in other species, birds, insects, plants, cryptochromes have been conclusively shown to respond to magnetic fields. The mechanism is quantum. Yes, quantum. At the molecular level, magnetic fields can influence the spin states of electrons in cryptochrome molecules, affecting chemical reactions in ways that can, in principle, be detected by the nervous system. This is not speculation. This is established quantum biology. The question is not whether the mechanism exists in humans, but whether we still use it. Whether the signal, if it is generated, is processed by the brain in a way that produces conscious or unconscious awareness of magnetic fields. And the evidence, while not conclusive, is suggestive. A 2019 study by Caltech researchers placed participants in a Faraday cage, a chamber shielded from external electromagnetic interference, and exposed them to controlled magnetic fields similar to Earth's. The participants sat quietly, eyes closed, while their brain activity was monitored via EEG. The results. When the magnetic field was rotated, a subset of participants showed changes in alpha wave activity, brainwaves associated with wakeful rest and sensory processing. The participants did not consciously perceive anything. They could not report any sensation, but their brains responded to magnetic fields. The effect was not universal. Not everyone showed it, but enough did that it could not be dismissed as noise or artifact. Something was happening, something real. Follow-up studies have been mixed. Some have replicated the effect. Others have not. This is typical of nascent fields of research, especially those investigating subtle phenomena. The mechanisms are not well understood. The variability is high. The signal-to-noise ratio is low. But the possibility remains. The door is open, and there are other lines of evidence. Studies of magnetic field effects on human cognition have found small but measurable impacts on reaction time, spatial reasoning, mood. Again, not universal, not dramatic, but present. Studies of migratory cultures, peoples who navigate vast distances without technological aids, have found anomalies in spatial reasoning that cannot be fully explained by visual or auditory cues. Something else seems to be involved. Something subtle, something that conventional neuroscience does not yet have tools to fully measure. And then there are the magnetite crystals. They have been found in human brain tissue, not in large quantities, not in consistent locations, but they are there. Tiny, nanoscale crystals of magnetite embedded in the membranes of cells in the ethmoid bone, a bone in the skull near the nasal cavity. In other animals, salmon, birds, sea turtles, similar magnetite deposits are known to be part of the magnetoreception system. The crystals act as tiny compass needles, physically responding to magnetic fields, and this mechanical response is transduced into neural signals. Could the same be happening in humans? Could the crystals we carry be the dormant hardware of a sense we no longer consciously use? The research is ongoing. The answers are not yet clear. But the possibility is there, grounded in anatomy, in biochemistry, in the material reality of your body. You carry within you the structures necessary for magnetoreception. The genes, the proteins, the crystals, the neural pathways. Whether you can access them, whether they still function, whether they can be reawakened is an open question. One that science is only beginning to explore. But the fact that the question can be asked, that it is being asked by serious researchers at serious institutions, is itself significant. Because it means the possibility is real. Not metaphorical, not spiritual, not wishful thinking, real. And that reality is what grounds everything else. The myths, the practices, the cultural knowledge, the personal experiences, they are not fantasies. They are not delusions. They are attempts in different languages and different frameworks to describe something that is actually there. Something that science is only now beginning to have the tools to measure and understand. This is the pattern we see again and again in the history of science. Indigenous knowledge, dismissed as superstition, turns out to contain deep truths about the natural world. Phenomena dismissed as impossible turn out to be real, once we develop the instruments and the concepts to detect them. Magnetoreception in humans may be following the same trajectory. From dismissal to curiosity to tentative evidence to, perhaps, eventual confirmation. We are not there yet. The evidence is not conclusive. The mechanisms are not fully understood. The variability is high, the effects subtle. But we are on the path. The inquiry has begun. And the fact that you are listening to this, that you have followed this thread this far, means you are part of that inquiry. Because the science alone is not enough. The measurements, the experiments, the data, they can tell us that something is there, but they cannot tell us what it means, what it feels like, how it changes your experience of the world. For that, we need lived experience. We need people willing to explore, to experiment, to cultivate sensitivity to forces that most people ignore. We need the bridge between laboratory and life, between measurement and meaning. We need people who will try the experiment I described earlier, who will sit in silence, in nature, and ask their body which way is north, who will pay attention to the answer, however faint, however uncertain, who will practice, who will cultivate, who will relearn, not for science, not to prove anything, but for themselves, to know what it feels like, to experience the sense directly, rather than reading about it, hearing about it, wondering about it. Because in the end, that is what matters. Not what we can prove, but what we can feel. What we can know in our bodies, in our bones, in the silent certainty that needs no explanation. The compass is there. The science says so. The myths say so. The tools say so. The rare individuals who still feel it say so. And perhaps, if you are quiet enough, still enough, patient enough, you will say so too. There is a practice in Zen Buddhism called just sitting. Shikantaza in Japanese. It is not meditation in the usual sense, not focused concentration on a particular object or thought. It is simply sitting. being present, allowing whatever arises to arise, without judgment, without interference. It is, in a sense, a practice of listening. Not with the ears, but with the whole body. Listening to what is, without trying to change it, interpret it, or understand it. And in that listening, practitioners sometimes report experiences that defy easy categorization. Sensations of connection to the space around them. Awareness of directions they are not consciously attending to. A sense of orientation that is not visual, not auditory, but something else. Something quieter. Something deeper. Is this magnetoreception? Or something else entirely? The Zen masters would likely say the question itself is a distraction. What matters is the experience, not the explanation. But for our purposes, the question is relevant. Because if practices like just sitting can produce experiences of directional awareness, of spatial orientation that seems to arise from nowhere, then perhaps what they are doing is quieting the conscious mind enough that subtler senses can be heard. Perhaps they are creating the conditions for magnetoreception to emerge from dormancy. Not through effort, not through striving, but through stillness. Through allowing. This aligns with what we know about how subtle senses work. They are easily overwhelmed by louder signals, vision, hearing, thought. But when those louder signals are quieted, when the mind is still and the attention is soft, the subtle signals can come through. It is like trying to hear a whisper in a crowded room. Impossible when everyone is shouting. But if everyone falls silent, the whisper becomes audible. The magnetic sense, if it exists in humans, is a whisper. Faint, easily drowned out, but potentially audible if the conditions are right. And the conditions are stillness, silence, natural environment, time, patience, and most importantly, a willingness to trust sensations that have no obvious source, that seem to arise from nowhere, that the rational mind immediately wants to dismiss as imagination or random noise. This is the hard part, because we are trained, from childhood, to trust only what we can consciously perceive and rationally explain. Anything else is suspect, unreliable, not real. But the body knows things the mind does not. It processes information below the threshold of consciousness, integrates signals from sources the conscious mind has no access to. This is why you can feel when someone is watching you, even when you cannot see them. Why you can sense danger before you consciously identify a threat. Why you sometimes know which way to turn at a crossroads even when you have no rational basis for the choice. These are not supernatural abilities. They are natural ones. Functions of a nervous system far more sophisticated than our conscious awareness can comprehend. And magnetoreception, if it can be reawakened, is likely the same. Not a mystical power, but a natural sense, operating below consciousness, providing information that the rational mind cannot access directly but that the body knows how to use. This is why the practices that seem most likely to cultivate it are not analytical, not intellectual, not about trying to consciously detect magnetic fields. They are about cultivating embodied awareness. Learning to trust the body. Learning to listen to sensations that have no name, no obvious cause, no rational explanation. They are about unlearning the habit of dismissing anything that cannot be consciously explained. And this is a profound shift, because it challenges one of the core assumptions of modern consciousness, that what you consciously perceive is all that is real, all that matters, all that can be trusted. To cultivate magnetoreception is to challenge that assumption, to acknowledge that your body knows more than your mind, that there are forms of intelligence, of knowing, of sensing that operate outside the narrow bandwidth of conscious awareness. This is humbling, and for some threatening, because it undermines the sense of mastery, of control, of rational understanding that modern culture values so highly. But it is also liberating, because it means you are more than you think you are. You carry capacities you have never used, senses you have never awakened, forms of connection to the world that you have never explored. You are richer, more complex, more deeply embedded in the fabric of reality than the story of isolated, rational, conscious selfhood suggests. And to explore those capacities, to awaken those senses, is to discover dimensions of experience that modernity has foreclosed. Not because they are impossible, but because they are incompatible with the worldview, the lifestyle, the technological infrastructure that dominates contemporary life. To feel the magnetic field is to feel the earth. To be oriented by it is to be in relationship with it. To trust it is to trust something larger than your individual will, larger than your conscious plans, larger than the human world of cities and screens and schedules. It is to remember that you are an animal, a body, a creature of this planet, shaped by its forces, held by its fields, oriented by its ancient, invisible architecture. And that remembering changes everything. It changes what you value, what you trust, what you seek. It changes your relationship with technology, with civilization, with the assumption that human cleverness can substitute for connection, for embodiment, for rootedness in the living world. It does not mean rejecting technology. It does not mean retreating from civilization, but it does mean holding them differently, recognizing them as tools, as strategies, as temporary solutions to specific problems, not as ultimate reality, not as the only way to be human. Because we have been human in many ways. For most of our history, we were human with a magnetic sense, with an inner compass, with a felt connection to the earth that did not depend on maps or satellites or external authorities. And we can be that again. Not by going backward, not by rejecting what we have learned, what we have built, but by integrating it, by bringing the old sense into the new world, by becoming humans who are both technologically sophisticated and sensorially alive. This is the synthesis we are reaching toward, the possibility that hovers at the edge of this inquiry. Not a return to the past, but a restoration of what was lost, held together with what we have gained. A species that can build satellites and feel magnetic fields, that can map the genome and trust the body, that can reason abstractly and sense concretely, that can be both animal and angel, both wild and wise. This is what the compass offers. Not a single sense, but a doorway, a threshold between worlds, a way of being that we have not yet fully imagined. And it begins with a simple question, asked in stillness, in silence, in the deep listening of the body. Which way is north? Let us imagine, for a moment, what it would be like if the sense were fully restored. Not in a few individuals practicing in isolation, but widely, culturally, as a recognized, cultivated, valued human capacity. How would the world change? The most obvious impact would be on navigation. People would rely less on external devices, more on internal knowing. Children would be taught to pay attention to their magnetic sense the way they are now taught to read and write. It would be considered a basic life skill, a form of literacy as important as any other. But the impacts would go deeper than navigation, because to feel the magnetic field is to feel connection to the earth. It is to experience yourself as embedded in a planetary system, held by forces that transcend the human scale, oriented by an architecture that was here long before you and will be here long after. That felt sense of connection would change how we relate to the planet. It is hard to feel truly separate from something you are constantly sensing, constantly aligned with, constantly in relationship to. Environmental destruction would become not an abstract moral issue, but a visceral violation. To damage the earth would be to damage the field that orients you, the presence that holds you, the force that connects you to everything else. This is speculative, yes, but it aligns with what we see in cultures that have maintained strong connections to the land. They do not need philosophical arguments for environmental stewardship. They feel it. It is not a duty, but a relationship. Not an obligation, but a recognition of interdependence. And interdependence, felt in the body, is far more powerful than interdependence understood in the mind. So one impact would be ecological, a shift toward cultures and systems that value relationship with the earth over exploitation of it. Another impact would be psychological. As we discussed earlier, the loss of magnetoreception may contribute to the chronic sense of disorientation, of lostness that characterizes modern life. If the sense were restored, if people felt oriented, aligned, connected, how would that change their inner experience? Perhaps rates of anxiety, depression, dissociation would decrease. Perhaps people would feel more grounded, more certain, more at home in their bodies and their lives. Again, this is speculative, but it is testable. Populations that maintain strong directional awareness, like the Tseltal Maya or the Gugu Yimithir, show lower rates of certain forms of psychological distress. The correlation is not conclusive, but it is suggestive. A third impact would be social. If people felt less dependent on external guidance, on authorities, on systems that tell them where to go and how to get there, how would that change power structures? The ability to orient yourself is a form of autonomy, of self-sufficiency, of independence. In a culture that values compliance, predictability, control, such autonomy is inconvenient. But in a culture that values freedom, creativity, resilience, such autonomy is essential. So the restoration of magnetoreception would not be neutral. It would have political implications, cultural implications, implications for how societies organize themselves and how power is distributed. This is perhaps why the sense was allowed to fade, or actively suppressed, because a population that can orient itself, that knows where it is and where it wants to go, that trusts its own felt sense over external authorities, is harder to control. And perhaps this is also why the sense is worth restoring. Not just for navigation, not just for connection to the earth, but for autonomy. For the reclamation of a capacity that makes you less dependent, less compliant, less willing to surrender your own knowing to the guidance of systems that may not have your best interests at heart. This is radical, and perhaps uncomfortable, but it is worth considering. Because the loss of magnetoreception is not an isolated phenomenon. It is part of a larger pattern of disconnection, of disembodiment, of the transfer of capacities from the individual to the system, from the body to the technology, from the felt sense to the calculated measurement. We have outsourced navigation to GPS memory to smartphones, social connection to platforms, even thinking increasingly to algorithms. And with each outsourcing, we lose a capacity. We become more dependent, more passive, more willing to accept the guidance of systems we do not understand and cannot question. The restoration of magnetoreception is not a solution to this, but it is a resistance, a reclamation, a small but significant step toward re-embodiment, toward self-sufficiency, toward trusting the intelligence of the body over the convenience of the device. And if we can reclaim this one sense, perhaps we can reclaim others. Perhaps we can begin to rebuild a relationship with our own capacities, our own knowing, our own felt experience of the world. This is why the inquiry matters. Why it is more than a curiosity, more than an academic question. It is about what kind of humans we want to be, what capacities we want to cultivate, what forms of connection and autonomy and embodiment we want to prioritize. The compass is a symbol, a starting point, a thread that, if followed, leads to deeper questions about what we have lost, what we might restore, and what kind of future we want to build. A future in which humans are not passive consumers of technological guidance, but active participants in the sensing, knowing, navigating dance of embodied life on a living planet. A future in which we remember that we are animals, evolved over billions of years, carrying within us capacities we have only begun to explore, senses we have only begun to understand. A future in which we trust ourselves, our bodies, our felt sense of rightness, of alignment, of connection. This is the vision, the possibility, the invitation, and it begins with something as simple as standing still, closing your eyes, and asking your body, which way is north? Try it, not because I tell you to, not because you want to prove anything, but because you are curious, because you wonder, because something in you wants to know whether the compass is still there, still whispering, still waiting for you to listen. And if you feel even the faintest pull, even the slightest sense of orientation, trust it. Follow it. See where it leads. Because the journey of remembering begins with a single step, a single question, a single moment of trust in the body you have spent your whole life inhabiting but perhaps never fully listening to. The compass is there. It has always been there, and it is waiting for you to come home. Perhaps you're close now, close to something you've been searching for without quite knowing it. Something that feels like an ending, but is really a beginning. Stay with me just a little longer. What if the animals know? What if, when a dog circles before lying down, aligning its body to some invisible axis, it is not just a vestigial behavior from ancestral denning instincts, but an active, present response to magnetic fields? What if, when cattle in a field all face the same direction, When birds on a wire all orient the same way, they are not just responding to wind or sun, but to the pull of the Earth's magnetic field. What if the animals around us, domesticated and wild, are constantly demonstrating the sense we have lost? Living proof that it is real, that it matters, that it shapes behavior in ways we no longer consciously recognize. There is research on this, on the magnetic alignment of cattle, on the directional preferences of dogs, on the orientation behaviors of mammals that, by all conventional understanding, should not care about magnetic north. And the research shows they do care. They do orient. Not always, not perfectly, but consistently enough that the pattern is real, measurable, undeniable. Cows grazing in fields, when undisturbed by overhead power lines or other electromagnetic interference, align their bodies along the magnetic north-south axis, preferentially, significantly above chance. Why? No one knows. The conventional explanation is that it minimizes exposure to certain angles of sunlight, or optimizes digestion, or serves some other metabolic function. But these explanations are post hoc, speculative. The truth is, we do not know why they do it. But they do. And they do it in response to magnetic fields. When the local magnetic field is disturbed by power lines, by buried pipes, the alignment breaks down. The cows face randomly. But remove the disturbance, and the pattern returns. The same has been observed in deer, in foxes, in wild boar. Mammals with no obvious need for long-distance navigation, living in familiar territories, nevertheless orient themselves to magnetic north. Why? Perhaps because the sense is not only about navigation. Perhaps it is about something more fundamental, about alignment, about being in harmony with the field, the way a magnet aligns with a magnetic field, effortlessly, naturally, because that is what magnets do. Perhaps the animals feel more comfortable, more at ease, more settled when they are aligned. And perhaps we once did too. Think about how you arrange your furniture, how you choose where to sit in a room, how you position your bed. Most people say they are optimizing for light, for traffic flow, for view. But sometimes, there is a sense that a certain arrangement is just right, and you cannot quite explain why. What if part of that rightness is magnetic? What if, unconsciously, you are responding to the same forces the cattle respond to? Seeking alignment, seeking harmony with the field, even though you do not consciously perceive it? This is testable. And it has been tested to some degree. Studies of bedroom orientation have found weak but measurable correlations between bed alignment and sleep quality. People who sleep with their heads pointing north or south report, on average, slightly better sleep than those who sleep east-west. The effect is small, not universal, confounded by many other variables. But it is there, and it aligns with traditional practices. Feng Shui, the ancient Chinese art of placement, emphasizes magnetic orientation. Vastashastra, the Indian equivalent, does the same. Beds, desks, altars, all are positioned according to cardinal directions, based on the belief that alignment with these directions affects energy, health, well-being. Modern science dismisses this as superstition. But what if it is not? What if it is empirical knowledge, accumulated over thousands of years of paying attention to how the body feels in different orientations, in different alignments with forces that were not understood mechanically but were understood experientially, practically, somatically? What if the ancients knew something we have forgotten? Not through mysticism, not through revelation, but through the same process by which all practical knowledge is accumulated. Observation, experimentation, refinement over generations. They noticed that people felt better when aligned certain ways, that animals preferred certain orientations, that buildings positioned along certain axes felt more harmonious, more comfortable, more alive. And they built systems of knowledge around these observations. Systems that modern science has largely dismissed, because the mechanisms were not understood, because the forces involved could not be measured with the instruments available. But now, with our understanding of magnetoreception, with our ability to measure weak magnetic fields and their effects on biological systems, perhaps we can begin to validate what the ancients knew. Perhaps we can begin to see that Feng Shui and Vastashastra are not superstition, but proto-science. Early, intuitive explorations of the same phenomena that modern magnetoreception research is only now beginning to investigate with controlled experiments and quantitative methods. This is the pattern we see again and again. Indigenous knowledge, dismissed and devalued, turns out to contain deep truths that science later rediscovers. Plant medicines, ecological relationships, navigational techniques, and now, perhaps, sensitivity to magnetic fields. The knowledge was never lost. It was only forgotten by those who stopped listening, by cultures that prioritized abstract reasoning over embodied knowing, technological innovation over traditional wisdom, the new over the old. But the knowledge is still there, in the animals, in the practices of cultures that never fully disconnected from the land, in the faint, barely perceptible responses of our own bodies, when we pay attention, when we create the conditions for subtler senses to be heard. The compass is all around us, in the cows in the field, in the alignment of your bed, in the sense of rightness you feel when you face a certain direction, even though you cannot explain why. We are surrounded by evidence, by reminders, by invitations to remember, and perhaps the animals are not just demonstrating the sense for themselves. Perhaps they are demonstrating it for us, showing us what we have lost, showing us what is possible, showing us the way back. If we pay attention, if we watch, if we learn to see what they are, showing us, this is another practice, then, another way of cultivating sensitivity. Watch the animals. Notice how they orient. Notice when they all face the same direction, when they circle before settling, when they seem to prefer certain alignments over others. And then try it yourself. Face the way they face. Align yourself the way they align. See how it feels. Not with expectation. Not with the demand for dramatic results. But with curiosity. With openness. With the willingness to notice subtle differences, faint sensations, small shifts in comfort or clarity or ease. The animals know. They have always known. They never forgot. And they are waiting, patient and silent, for us to remember too. There is one more thread to follow, one more question to ask, and it is perhaps the most unsettling of all. What if the loss of magnetoreception was not gradual but sudden? We have spoken of it as a slow fading, a drift over generations, driven by settlement and electromagnetic pollution and cultural practices that suppressed the sense. And perhaps that is part of the story. But what if there was also a threshold, a moment, or a series of moments, when something changed dramatically? When the sense went from functional to dormant not over centuries but over a few generations. There is a period in human history, roughly 12,000 to 10,000 years ago, when enormous changes occurred. The end of the last ice age, the extinction of megafauna, the rapid rise of agriculture, the founding of the first permanent settlements, the emergence of complex societies. It is a period of transformation so profound that it is sometimes called the Neolithic Revolution, a turning point in the human story, after which nothing was the same. And it is also the period when the magnetite tools disappear from the archaeological record, when the evidence of magnetic sensitivity vanishes, when the myths begin to speak of a lost golden age, a time when humans were more connected, more capable, more aligned with the earth. What if something happened during that period? Something that affected human neurology, human sensitivity, human relationship with the magnetic field? There are many possibilities. Some mundane, some speculative, some that venture into territories that mainstream science does not yet take seriously. One possibility, a geomagnetic event. The Earth's magnetic field has reversed many times in geological history, and during reversals, the field weakens dramatically. It becomes chaotic, fragmented, unstable. If such a reversal occurred during the period of human cognitive and cultural development, it could have disrupted magnetoreception, made the sense unreliable, forced humans to develop alternative navigation strategies. But the geological record does not show a reversal during that period. The last one occurred 780,000 years ago. There have been minor excursions, temporary weaknesses in the field, but nothing dramatic enough to clearly correlate with the changes in human behavior. Another possibility, the rise of fire. Humans have used fire for hundreds of thousands of years, but the intensity of fire use increased dramatically with settlement. Hearths, kilns, smelting furnaces, constant exposure to localized heat and magnetic disturbances from metal tools and objects. Could this have gradually degraded magnetoreception the way electromagnetic pollution does today? Possible, but speculative. No direct evidence. A third possibility, more controversial: deliberate suppression. We touched on this earlier. The idea that early civilizations recognized the disruptive potential of individuals who could orient themselves independently, who felt the pull of elsewhere, who could not be easily rooted in place. And that they developed cultural practices, rituals, architecture, social structures, designed to suppress the sense. But why would this suddenly accelerate 10,000 years ago? What changed? Perhaps nothing external. Perhaps what changed was internal. Perhaps the development of language, of abstract thought, of symbolic reasoning, capacities that emerged and were refined during the Upper Paleolithic and Neolithic, created a kind of cognitive noise that drowned out subtler senses. Because language is loud. Thought is loud. When you are constantly narrating your experience, constantly thinking about what things mean, constantly abstracting and categorizing and reasoning, there is no space for quiet, for stillness, for the subtle signals that operate below the threshold of language. Perhaps the loss of magnetoreception was not a physical change, but a cognitive one. Not a loss of capacity, but a loss of access. The sense is still there, still functioning, still generating signals, but the signals are drowned out by the constant chatter of the linguistic, symbolic, reasoning mind. This would explain why practices that quiet the mind, meditation, fasting, sensory deprivation, seem to enhance sensitivity to magnetic fields. They are not creating a new sense, but quieting the noise that prevents the existing sense from being heard. And it would explain why the sense might be recoverable. Because if it is not lost, only obscured, then the work of restoration is not biological, but psychological. Not genetic, but attentional. It is the work of learning to be quiet, to still the mind, to create space for the body to speak in languages the conscious mind does not recognize. This is a more hopeful interpretation, because biological change is slow, difficult, beyond individual control. But cognitive change is possible. Attentional change is possible. Learning to quiet the mind, to listen to the body, to trust subtle signals. This is something anyone can practice, regardless of genetics, regardless of environment. But it requires something modern culture does not easily provide. Silence. Stillness. Time away from language, from thought, from the constant stimulation and distraction that characterizes contemporary life. It requires, in other words, a kind of retreat. Not permanent, not total, but regular. Daily, if possible. Moments of genuine quiet, genuine stillness, genuine presence in the body without the mediation of thought. This is why so many contemplative traditions emphasize silence. Not as an end in itself, but as a condition for deeper forms of knowing. For sensing what cannot be sensed when the mind is busy, when language is running, when attention is scattered. Silence is not empty. It is full. Full of signals, of sensations, of subtle forms of awareness that only emerge when the louder channels are quiet. And perhaps, in that silence, the magnetic sense can be heard. Not as a dramatic revelation, not as a sudden awakening, but as a quiet recognition. A faint pull, a subtle knowing. A sense that, yes, this direction feels right. That way feels more aligned. This orientation feels more settled. It is not much. It is not the unerring accuracy of a sea turtle navigating across an ocean. But it is something. A beginning. A thread that, if followed with patience and trust, might lead somewhere deeper. And if the loss was cognitive, not biological, then perhaps the restoration is already underway. In every person who sits in silence, who walks in nature without headphones, without distractions, who pays attention to their body, to their felt sense, to the subtle signals that have no name. Perhaps the compass is already waking. Slowly, quietly, in scattered individuals, in marginal spaces, in moments of stillness that the busy world does not notice. Perhaps the revolution is not coming. Perhaps it is already here. Growing in silence, spreading through practices that look like nothing, that produce no measurable output, that do not announce themselves. but that are nonetheless changing what it means to be human, restoring what was lost, remembering what was forgotten, one quiet moment at a time. So where does this leave us? Where does this leave you, listening to these words in the quiet of night, or the stillness of dawn, or the in-between hours when the world seems to pause? It leaves us with a choice, the same choice that has echoed through this entire exploration. Do you want to remember? Not in the abstract, not as an interesting idea to consider and then set aside, but actually, practically, in your body, in your life, in the way you move through the world. Do you want to cultivate the sense? To spend time in silence, in nature, paying attention to subtle pulls and orientations that you cannot explain? To trust your body in ways you have not trusted it before? Do you want to be someone who can stand in an empty field, eyes closed, and point north? Not because you calculated it, not because you memorized it, but because you felt it? This is not a small thing. It is not a party trick or a curiosity. It is a form of embodied knowing that challenges fundamental assumptions about what it means to be modern, to be civilized, to be human in the 21st century. It is a choice to step toward the animal, toward the body, toward forms of intelligence that the rational mind does not control or fully understand. And that choice has consequences. It will change how you relate to technology, to maps, to GPS, to the devices that tell you where you are and where to go. You will still use them, there is no need for dogmatic rejection, but you will hold them differently. As tools, not as authorities. As supplements, not as replacements for your own sensing. It will change how you relate to place. You will begin to notice orientation, alignment, the subtle ways that different directions feel different. You will develop preferences, intuitions, a sense of where you want to be and how you want to face. And you will trust those preferences, even when you cannot explain them. It will change how you relate to your body. You will learn to listen to it in new ways, to trust signals that have no rational basis, to allow your body to guide you in ways your mind never could. And it will change how you relate to the Earth. Because to feel the magnetic field is to feel the planet itself. To sense its presence, its structure, its forces. You will no longer think of the Earth as an abstraction, a concept, a collection of facts. You will feel it, constantly, as the ground beneath your feet, yes, but also as the field that orients you, the presence that holds you, the living system of which you are a part. This is a profound shift. From seeing yourself as separate, as an observer, as a user of the Earth's resources, to experiencing yourself as embedded, as participant, as one expression of the Earth's own intelligence and sensing and being. And that shift is political. It is ecological. It is spiritual. It changes everything, because you cannot feel that connection and continue to live as if it does not matter. You cannot sense the Earth and treat it as dead matter, as resource, as background to human activity. You become inevitably an advocate, a defender, a voice for the living world because you have felt it, and not intellectually but in your bones, that it is alive, that it matters, that what happens to it happens to you. This is why the question of magnetoreception is not just about navigation. It is about relationship, about connection, about what kind of humans we want to be and what kind of world we want to inhabit. Do we want to be a species that navigates by satellites, dependent on technology, insulated from direct contact with the planet? Or do we want to be a species that navigates by feeling, by sensing, by embodied connection to the forces and fields that have shaped life for billions of years? Both are possible. Both have value. The question is not either slash or, but what balance, what integration, what synthesis we want to create. And that question can only be answered individually. By you, by your choices, by what you practice, what you cultivate, what you value. This is not a prescription. It is an invitation, an offering, a thread you can follow or not, depending on what calls to you, what feels right, what you are ready for. There is no urgency, no deadline. The compass has waited for thousands of years, can wait longer, can wait for you to be ready, for the moment when the question becomes not should I, but how. And when that moment comes, the path is simple. Not easy, but simple. Go outside. Find a quiet place. Sit, breathe, close your eyes, and ask your body, which way is north? Listen. Not with your ears. Not with your mind. With your body. With the part of you that knows without thinking, that senses without perceiving, that orients without calculating. And when you feel something, a pull, a preference, a sense of rightness in a particular direction, trust it. Follow it. Test it against a compass if you want, or against the sun, or against your own repeated experience over days and weeks and months. But most importantly, notice it. Acknowledge it. Give it space. Give it attention. Let it grow. Because the sense, if it is there, is like a muscle. It grows stronger with use. It becomes clearer, more reliable, more trustworthy the more you attend to it, the more you honor it, the more you allow it to guide you. And over time, over years perhaps, you may find that you can navigate differently. That you feel oriented in ways you did not before. That you trust your body's sense of direction more than your mind's calculation of it. You may find that you are less lost. Not just physically, but existentially. That you feel more grounded, more connected, more aligned with something larger than yourself. You may find that you have come home, not to a place but to a way of being, a way of inhabiting your body, your planet, your life. And that homecoming is the deepest gift the compass offers. Not the ability to navigate, but the feeling of belonging, of being part of something ancient, something vast, something that holds you and guides you and knows you in ways that no technology, no map, no external authority ever could. The compass is not outside you. It is not something you need to find or acquire or learn. It is inside you. It has always been inside you. Waiting, quiet, patient, waiting for you to remember, waiting for you to come home. And now perhaps you are ready. Perhaps the question has become real. Not academic, not abstract, but personal, immediate, alive. Which way is north? Your body knows. It has always known. Are you ready to listen? There is a story I want to leave you with. Not from mythology, not from ancient texts, but from the present day. A few years ago, a woman, we'll call her Sarah, took a solo backpacking trip in the mountains. She was experienced, prepared, equipped with maps and compass and GPS. But on the third day, her GPS failed. Battery dead, despite her certainty that she had charged it. And in the scramble to find her backup battery, she dropped her compass. Tumbled down a ravine, irretrievable. She was not panicked. She knew the general direction to the trailhead. She had the sun. She had time. But the day was overcast. Thick clouds. No sun. And the trail, which should have been clear, had been washed out by recent rains. Landmarks she remembered were gone, altered, unrecognizable. She was lost. Not dangerously. She had food, water, shelter. She could wait for the weather to clear, for the sun to show itself, for visibility to return. But she was off schedule. People were expecting her. She did not want to trigger a search that wasn't necessary. So she sat on a fallen log at a junction of 3 possible paths, not knowing which to take. And in the sitting, in the stillness, she did something she had never done before. She closed her eyes, took a breath, and asked herself, which way feels right? She expected nothing. It was a whim, a moment of intuition or desperation or curiosity. But when she asked the question, something shifted. She felt, and this is how she described it later, a pull. Not physical, not muscular, but something deeper. A sense that one of the paths, the one to her left, was the right one. She opened her eyes, looked at the path. It did not look promising. It was overgrown, unclear, less traveled than the other 2. Logic said to take the wider, clearer trail to the right. But the pull said left. She hesitated. Logic versus intuition. Reason versus felt sense. She stood at the crossroads in more ways than one. And then she chose. She followed the pull. She took the left path. An hour later, she emerged onto a ridge she recognized. She was on course. The pull had been right. The compass inside her, dormant and forgotten, had spoken. And she had listened. She made it to the trailhead that afternoon. Safe. On time. No search necessary. And she never forgot the moment. The choice. The pull. The sense that something in her body had known the way, even when her mind did not. She has practiced since. Not obsessively, not religiously, but regularly. In the woods, in the city, in moments of quiet. Asking her body which way feels right. Paying attention to the answers. Testing them, trusting them, cultivating them. And she reports, tentatively, humbly, aware of how strange it sounds, that the sense has grown. That she can feel direction now, not always, not perfectly, but sometimes. That she trusts it. That it guides her not just in navigation, but in life. In which opportunities to pursue, which relationships to invest in, which paths to walk. She describes it as alignment, as knowing in her body when she is facing the right way. Not morally, not philosophically, but literally, practically, somatically. The right way for her, in this moment, in this place, in this life. Is it magnetoreception? Or is it something else, intuition, unconscious processing of environmental cues, confirmation bias? She does not know. She does not care. What matters is that it works, that it serves her, that it has restored a form of connection and confidence and trust in herself that she did not know was possible. She is one person, one story, one example among perhaps many, perhaps few. But she is proof. Proof that the question is not academic. Proof that the practice is possible. Proof that the compass, if you listen for it, can still speak. And her story raises a question. How many others are there? How many people have had similar experiences? Moments when they felt a pull, trusted it, found that it led them true, but dismissed it, explained it away, never pursued it further. How many people are carrying the sense, using it unconsciously, benefiting from it without ever naming it, without ever recognizing what it is? Perhaps more than we think. Perhaps the sense has never been fully dormant, only unacknowledged. Only hidden beneath layers of rational explanation, scientific skepticism, cultural dismissal of anything that cannot be measured or proven or explained. Perhaps we are surrounded by people who can feel the compass, who navigate by it, who trust it, but who never speak of it because they have no language for it, no community that recognizes it, no framework that validates it. Perhaps the restoration has already begun. Not as a movement, not as a conscious effort, but as a spontaneous reawakening in scattered individuals who, for whatever reason, have created the conditions for the sense to emerge. And perhaps the next step is not to cultivate the sense in isolation, but to find each other, to share experiences, to develop language, to build communities of practice where people can explore magnetoreception together, can test it, refine it, learn from each other's successes and failures. This is already happening in small ways. Workshops on intuitive navigation, forums where people share experiences of directional knowing, research groups studying magnetoreception in humans, recruiting volunteers, gathering data. It is marginal, yes. Fringe, yes. Dismissed by mainstream science and culture, yes. But it is happening. And you, listening to this, are part of it now. Whether you choose to practice or not, whether you pursue the sense or not, you are part of the inquiry. Part of the conversation. Part of the collective process of remembering what we forgot, of restoring what we lost, of becoming, once again, humans who can feel the earth. This is the story we are telling together. Not a story of individual achievement, but of collective restoration. Not a story of discovery, but of remembrance. Not a story of progress, but of return. And you are a character in it. Not a passive observer, but an active participant. Your choices matter. Your practices matter. Your willingness to listen, to trust, to experiment. It all matters. Because the compass does not awaken in laboratories or universities or official institutions. It awakens in bodies, in moments of quiet, in choices to trust the pull. It awakens in people like Sarah, like you, like anyone who asks the question and listens for the answer. So ask, listen, trust, and see where the compass leads. So here you are, at the end of this long, winding path through time and gene and myth and practice. If you've made it this far, if you've stayed with me through the silence and the questions and the unsettling truths, then perhaps you were always meant to find this story. Perhaps it found you. Take it with you. Let it settle into your dreams, into the quiet moments when you wonder where you're going, where you belong, what it is your body knows that your mind has forgotten. And if it speaks to you, if it pulls at you, If it makes you want to wander into the wilderness and stand still and listen, then do it. Point into the dark. Trust the pull. Follow the whisper. The compass is waiting, and the earth remembers you. In the deep silence before dawn, when the night has thinned but the sun has not yet risen, stand outside if you can. Feel the cool air on your skin. Hear the quiet that is not empty but full of rustlings and stirrings and the slow breath of the world. Close your eyes. Place your feet firmly on the ground. Feel the earth beneath you solid and ancient and alive. And ask, which way is north? Do not think. Do not reason. Do not try to remember where the sun rose yesterday or which way the wind tends to blow. Just ask. And listen. Listen with your body, with your belly, with your bones, with the part of you that existed before language, before thought, before the conscious mind learned to explain and analyze and rationalize. Listen with the compass you carry, whether you have ever used it or not, whether you believe in it or not, whether it makes sense or not. Just listen and notice. Notice what you feel, pull perhaps, or a sense of rightness in a particular direction, or a subtle pressure, like a hand on your shoulder, gently turning you, or nothing. Nothing at all except the quiet and the dark and the cool air on your skin. All of these are valid. All of these are information. Even the nothing is information, because it tells you that you are not yet quiet enough, not yet still enough, not yet ready to hear the whisper beneath the noise. But you can be, with practice, with patience, with time. The compass does not demand anything from you. It does not judge. It does not withhold itself from those who are unworthy or unprepared. It simply waits, patient as stone, old as the world itself. It waits for you to be ready, for you to create the conditions, the silence, the stillness, the trust, in which it can be heard. And when you do, when the moment comes that you feel it, not think it, not imagine it, but feel it undeniably in your body, you will know. You will know that you are not alone, that you have never been alone, that you are held, oriented, guided by forces older and vaster than you can comprehend. You will know that you are part of the earth, not metaphorically, not philosophically, but literally, physically, somatically, part of the magnetic field that wraps around the planet, part of the living system that has been evolving for billions of years, part of the great web of life that connects everything to everything else. And that knowing will change you. It will make you gentler, perhaps, more humble, more aware of your smallness in the vastness of time and space, and yet more certain of your significance, your place, your belonging. It will make you braver, perhaps, more willing to trust yourself, to follow your own sense of direction, to walk paths that others do not see or understand. It will make you more alive, more present, more awake to the subtle signals, the quiet pulses, the invisible currents that move through every moment, every place, every breath. This is what the compass offers. Not power, not mastery, but belonging, connection, the simple, profound recognition that you are home, that you have always been home, that the earth has held you, oriented you, guided you every moment of your life, whether you knew it or not. And now, perhaps, and knowing you can choose. You can choose to honor it, to cultivate it, to live in alignment with it, or you can set this aside. Return to the world of maps and satellites and external guidance. There is no judgment in that choice. The compass will wait. It has waited for thousands of years, can wait longer. But if you choose to remember, if you choose to practice, if you choose to listen, then know that you are not alone. There are others, scattered, quiet, unorganized, but they are there, and they are waiting too, waiting for the moment when enough people have remembered, when the practice becomes a movement, when the compass becomes not a secret or a curiosity, but a recognized, valued, cultivated capacity of the human species. That moment may not come in your lifetime. It may not come for generations, but it will come, because the sense is real, because the need is real, because we are, as a species, lost, and we are beginning to realize it, and we are beginning to search for the way home. And the way home begins with a simple question, asked in stillness, in silence, in the deep listening of the body. Which way is north? Your body knows. It has always known. Are you ready to listen? If this story moved you, if it made you wonder, if it stirred something you didn't know was sleeping, then let me know. Leave a word, a thought, a marker of your passage through this strange territory we've explored together. And wherever you are, whoever you are, wherever you're listening from tonight, may you find your way. May you remember. May you always, always know which way is north. The compass is inside you. It has always been inside you, and it is waiting for you to come home. Good night, or good morning, or good in between. Whatever time it is where you are, whatever moment you have found yourself in, may you carry this with you. May you let it work on you, in you, through you. May you remember what you forgot. May you awaken what sleeps. May you find your way home. The compass is calling, and the earth is waiting. Listen.